it is a pink flower. It's a magenta flower, but we will use other colours. So, but for the moment, we can use magenta. I will just quickly try and let's see if I've got it handy. Let's see. I do. I'm just going to quickly tell you for those who sort of don't know, so they're wondering necessarily what some of my wiggles are that I draw. When I do my drawing to go onto paper, I draw two things. I draw where shadows and where highlights are, and then I will draw, apart from just the outlines, then I'll also draw any shapes of the petals, any sort of veins or the contour of a petal. So these sort of stripy lines don't indicate necessarily stripes, although in some cases, you know, that can be a slight ridge that I saw in our photo, for instance. So, but they're not all the ridges. There might be two of them might work out to be where the ridges are, but a couple of these other ones are just really to describe the flow of the petal, and there's a little bump there because it's going to be a little bit of a curve and things like that. So they're reminders to me of shape. Those wiggle lines here, it's my shorthand for it's a soft transition between the magenta and the white that we see. So I've sort of, you know, decided that represents a sort of a nice soft gradient rather than a sharper edged shadow, for instance, or something like that. So there's that there. Let's see what else I do. I've done these lines down the edges to remind myself that when I was seeing it, I wanted to remember there's either a shadow along the edge, which I do see in some of these photos. It's almost like there's a little darker edge, darker part just before you get to the edge of the petal. So I've drawn those in to remind myself. So some of these are just really reminders. The little tip above here is to remind me that the very tip of that is quite pale. There's a little something going on up there. I haven't drawn in the shadow. I would normally draw in a line. I can see it sort of roughly goes like that. That I would see that is actually sort of where the shadow part of that petal roughly falls. So those are what all those sort of cryptic things mean. What else? Yeah, I mean, sometimes it gets even more confusing when I put that onto paper and then I'm wondering what I've meant, and I have taken some time to have to try and sort it out. That's actually what the first layer does for me. As I go back over everything and block it in a first layer of paint, you're sort of looking back and forth between the photo and what you've drawn and painting it, and you can sort of reassess or make adjustments, or I'm sort of getting myself really acquainted with more of the details and things. So that's what that all is. Would I say anything else about that, how I do that? No, I think that's it. It's the part that I like the least. It's, you know, it's always exciting to start something new, and it's really time consuming and ever so boring in a way to do it, because then once I've transferred it on, I then go over it again. So I've drawn it so many times by this stage in a light hard pencil, and as we've got some paler areas, I will just start taking out some of the pencil lines just in the part that's white, just so we don't have too much finish, because it is a little bit difficult to if you put on too many layers to take out pencil mark, but you can rub it out successfully even after a first layer of colour, unless it's lemon. I know that lemon can kind of help cement things on the paper quite well, and it gets a little bit tricky there. So where else? So this is a bit of white, so we'll just make sure that's a little bit lighter. I mean, if this whole thing was a darker, if it was all this magenta all over, then this line work would be fine, because I know that would be covering it. But at this stage, seeing as we've got some paleness going on, I'll just make sure we're mostly good to go. Okay, let's see. I've got some magenta, and that is... Oh, and another thing I was going to say with this flower is, for me at least, looking at that, it's very pretty looking at the photograph, and there's some very nice shadows that will make this look amazing. But in general, I don't find there to be much detail at all in it. So, because of that, I will be grabbing any bit of detail that I can see or even imagine, and using that and sort of expanding on it, and maybe emphasizing it a bit more and things like that, just to make the painting more interesting, because otherwise it can be quite flat. You know, you could see it's sort of a nice smooth curved petal, but I'm going to start making sure I get some of those lines in there, and making sure I make a difference between edges, and any tiny little difference in shadow or highlight, I sort of not super overemphasize, but do emphasize and make sure I grab that, because otherwise you end up with nothing to paint. Which is kind of, I mean, that's what makes my paintings a bit vibrant too, is I just sort of, I'm always emphasizing everything I see. Now that is, let's see, that's a little bit strong. So for magenta, it dries darker. I think one of the few colours that seem to dry darker than you put on. So we'll go for our first wash, where we're just getting used to everything and just sort of looking around as we paint. I'm going to go quite a bit lighter, yeah?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I just did some colour swatches before we started the lesson.
Yes.
And we brought out some Winsor & Newton. I don't have Winsor & Newton magenta. Looking at the photo, it seemed more pink than magenta in my photos, and the magenta looked more purpley.
Yes. Well, this is the thing, and this will be the difference between your paints and mine. My paint looks cool, but I would say quite a mid-pink. And what I do, and a couple of you will know this, what I do is I tend not to mix anything on the palette. I tend to mix it on the paper. So what I do see here, is I see that this petal here is quite a bit more sort of bluey purple, if we call this sort of a pinky purple, a bluey purple, yeah, much cooler. That's much cooler there. We've got some warmth in here, so yellow's going to go in here. It's cooler again here, but there's a little bit here that we might put in some warmth. Maybe a bit, yes, warmer up here. And I will do that all on the paper with other colours. So whilst you have if you had your magenta, for instance, that was a cooler base magenta, and you wanted to make your flower a little warmer, you could just go over everything with a very, very soft wash of, say, a lemon, just to bring it a little bit warmer. I mean, you can do that in the palette if you like. You can mix it, and Helen, please do if you feel like, if you want to try and match my colours. But if you look at your flower and look at your paint and try to match to the painting, you know, that would be fine as well. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be as close to what I'm painting. You know, you can look and see what you see and paint that. Yeah. Ultimately, you know, it's our own flower. We can paint it how we like. Each one of us, if we wanted to push it to be a bit more of a rosy colour, you could, or if you wanted it to be a bit more sort of bluish purpley, you could do that as well. I don't mind. But what I do is I sort of balance it on the paper. I tend to paint in single layers, and I'll add the colour on the paper to push it into cooler or warmer tones. I like doing that quite a bit. So we'll start off with my water brush. I always have it handy. So just a little retired brush that I have. And for this, let me grab my photograph. I'm just going to make it bigger where we're going to start. Okay. There's a little paleness on this side of this petal, so I think I'm going to make sure I get that. So I'm not going to paint to the edge of that petal. And as we are doing a nice sort of soft gradient, I will run a little bit of water across our sort of tide line. Make sure that sort of is damp. Magenta can be a little bit grabby on the paper. It, stays put when you put it down. So you either work fast, or you could, if you felt you wanted to, you could dampen the whole petal a little bit. But you'd need to make sure you let it dry so that the paper's damp but not wet. And that way it's sort of easier to pop the colour on the paper. I might do that for you on one of them, and then you'll see what I mean. For those of you who don't sort of do that at all, but for me, for this first one, just want to make sure that's damp enough. And what I will do is, generally I go in the flow of the shape of the petal, so that if any lines do dry a little bit harder, they're still drying in that same kind of line, in the same direction that I need it all to be. And this is your messy first, so you just don't even need to worry too much about anything, apart from making sure you don't paint over anything you shouldn't. But application's pretty easy. So that, and here as well we just need to do a little something, so I'm just going to stay away from there for a moment and just make sure my edge here is reasonably soft, and this edge here we can make sure that is as well. That is quite a sort of a blue colour in there, so just going to sort of drag it in with my water brush really, so it becomes a very soft pink that's come into there, leaving the edge white for the moment. And that may be about as dark as that area gets, because we'll probably pop a little bit of a purple of some description, whether that's a blue over there. Now this part here, I mean we're right into it already, but this part here, we want to make sure we're careful with that. It's pale, so I don't want to be too dark, and I may just even leave most of it for now and sort of come in with it later. There's a few lines that we can take down here, but because I've dampened this edge, they're not really going to behave well. We're going to have to let that dry for a moment before we come back and do any of that. So we can move on. See, there you go, move on to petal 2. That is it. Let's see. The only thing I'll do is I can just run just one more wash down this edge. That is going to be a dark edge. I can see that already, so I can just pop that in. I quite like doing that as well, because I don't wet my paper, what I will do is I'll use the washes that I've done almost as if I've wet my paper, and just let them dry a little bit and maybe come back in and do something like add a second wash of that. Because it's damp, it sort of blends nicer and things. So I'll do that quite a bit as well. So we want the second petal, and the second petal I've opened up another one of the other the other photo, because in our main photo it's quite soft, it's not super sharp. So I've opened up one of the other ones just to be sure that I'm not going to miss a highlight that sort of didn't come out in the big photo, that one of the littler photos sort of shows me more. I can see that it's quite a bit lighter around this edge here, and there's a whole bit of lightness through there. So I'll just make sure my wash is light enough. Otherwise nothing else too much there. I will still leave just the top edge, I think, of this, just here. And let's see, yeah, that's okay. We can just, with the water brush, we'll just sort of drag that up a little bit. I mean, I'm quite happy to really leave a lot of that there, so there's no colour in that just at this point. So there are a few shadows that I can see in the second photo that I'm looking at. That photo, if you did want to have a look, and another point is ends with 30189, and it's a slightly different angle to our main photo, but it does have some other nice details. And so because our petal is already damp, I'll just pop in a few more lines where it's a little bit darker that I see, just to get us on the way a little. Okay, so when I was talking about I really don't wet my canvas before, my paper before I do put things on. If I was painting larger, I might. If I was painting a bigger piece and I needed to paint it all at once, now bigger maybe like this size, right? Then I would, then I might go through and pop a bit of water on and dampen that down a little. So that's what we can do on this one. I'll show you for those who may or may not do that technique. I feel like a lot of people do that actually. So that's mostly all wet, but the trick with that is you've got to see, and move your head around a bit, I'll probably be in the camera shot doing that, and it's got to dry so that it has a slight sheen on it but not wet. Otherwise it sort of moves the wash that you put on too much and it creates a puddle. But if it's just dry enough, it will just stop anything from just getting sucked into the paper quickly, and so on. So we can pop in it does have a sort of a movement of its own. But like I say, I don't really paint like this very much. Quite nice though. Still avoiding the edge. So what I might just do, just to show you, is just pop in where the shadow, where I see the shadows of this. Do a few lines. So I've actually got two pencil lines here. One is to indicate where the shadow starts. The other one is to indicate where the shadow gets deeper. So I've done that. So that's what that bit of cryptic pencil work is. I'll leave that for the moment and come back to it after. I'll let that dry off. Now this one is, let's check my colour. We've got a highlight here, a significant highlight here, and sort of on this part here. So, oh, you know what we do have, which I don't have? I haven't drawn it in. There is a little bit of our sort of white into magenta goes in along there, so we'll keep that. So I'm just painting around where the magenta is, but not going over the highlighted, oh well, not going over the part that's paler, because I'm going to use my water brush and just soften the edges and let it sort of just blend out, but leave it quite distinctive for the moment. It's not that distinctive on the petal, but I kind of want to keep my options open always, which means I don't cover up anything that might be could be quite pale and look quite nice later on and help the shape of the petal. So just my water brush, I'll just take that up there for a moment. And I do see that the edge up the top here is a little bit darker. It's sort of on its curve, it's curving over. So I might just run that down there. Okay. And on that second photo, that one that I told you, 30189, all the shadows here are much more distinctive and much sharper, and so I'll probably go with that. In our main photo that I used to draw this, they're not as distinctive, but that doesn't mean we can't use the other photo. We just need to apply those changes. Or actually it's really just emphasizing. So right, on this one here. There's quite a lot of, it goes up there, is where the white meets the softer magenta. I'm going to make that quite pale, so I'll put a bit more water in my wash. And it's not getting very watery. Okay. I'll run my water brush roughly where it all sort of starts to change. And of course, I mean, it really, if you go down a little bit far, if you go up or not down enough, or any of those things, it really doesn't matter. This sort of can be anywhere. But because my magenta's pale, we can pop it over everything else, I think. Which should be quite okay. And for me, you might be wondering why I've just chopped off the edge of my little petal there, which I have because it's at the edge of the paper, and when I was doing this I was thinking that this might be part of a larger painting, and it may still be, and so I thought that would be where I could maybe put it, and I need to find some friends that go nicely with it further down the paper. So we just missed the tip of it. Although I was finding it quite hard to think to place other things, other flowers, other cyclamen on here actually, and see what might be good. So we'll see if it gets developed at all into anything. But I'll find some interesting friends to go with it. Now already that part where I'd put the water on has started to dry, which is why I just dragged a few lines of my magenta down, because if you look at this petal in the picture, there are quite a few lines that we can emphasize for interest and detail. There is, let's see, here is also part, a little bit more of a shadow, so I can pop that in. Like that, and I'm going to do that. Quite a lot, almost always. I'll use my water brush to soften any edge up until I get to the last layers, and then I almost put it away and don't use it. But I always try and make everything as soft as possible initially. Now this edge is a little bit darker, and you could just